This religious gathering can turn into something so tragic.
It was, and it really highlighted the critical need for strong crowd management plans, especially at events like the Brahmaputra Pushkaram, where millions of devotees gather on the banks of the Godavari River for ritual bathing.
Just imagine the sheer number of people, the limited space, the potential for things to get out of hand, for panic to set in. It's a recipe for disaster if it's not managed properly.
Exactly. And in this case, reports indicated that there were several factors that contributed to the tragedy. Not enough barricades to control the flow of the crowd, confusion among people because of unclear directions, and a lack of effective communication channels to get information out and manage the situation.
Those are all crucial things that the NDMA guidelines address, right? Things like designating clear entry and exit points, strategically placing barriers to direct the flow of people, and having a reliable communication system, including public address systems and even mobile alerts.
Absolutely. But guidelines, they only work if they're put into practice carefully. It takes coordination between the organizers, the local authorities, the police, medical teams, even trained volunteers.
And public awareness is so important too. People need to be aware of the risks, they need to follow safety instructions, and they need to speak up if they see something that's concerning. It's everyone's responsibility to make sure these mass gatherings are safe.
Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about a disaster that left a deep mark on India's collective memory: the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. This event was a stark reminder of how interconnected natural disasters can be and how vital early warning systems are.
The earthquake that caused this tsunami was off the coast of Sumatra, Indonesia, thousands of kilometers away from India. It's hard to believe that something happening so far away could have such a devastating impact on our shores.
It really shows the sheer power of nature. The tsunami waves triggered by that undersea earthquake, they traveled across the Indian Ocean at incredible speed, reaching the coast of India within hours. And at that time, India wasn't part of the International Tsunami Warning System, the ITWS.
So there was no way to anticipate the disaster or to warn people living along the coast.
Unfortunately not. And that lack of participation in the ITWS had tragic consequences. Coastal communities were caught completely off guard, and the impact was devastating.
Over 10,000 people died in India alone. That's just an unimaginable loss.
It is. But in the aftermath of that tragedy, India joined the ITWS and has been actively working to improve its tsunami preparedness.
And that includes setting up a network of sensors in the Indian Ocean to detect any unusual wave activity, right?
Exactly. And putting in place effective communication systems to quickly get warnings out to coastal communities. The Sagarvani app, which we mentioned earlier, plays a crucial role in that.
What about structural measures? Are there things that can be done to physically protect coastal areas from the force of a tsunami?
There are. Building seawalls or breakwaters to reduce the energy of the waves, identifying evacuation routes, and constructing elevated shelters in vulnerable areas. All of those things can significantly reduce the impact of a tsunami.
It's a reminder that while we can't control nature, we can definitely learn from past disasters and adjust our strategies to minimize their impact.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about a disaster that showed how human actions can actually make a natural event much worse. The 2013 Uttarakhand floods.
Those floods were incredibly destructive, with over 5,000 people losing their lives and widespread damage to infrastructure.
They were. And while the region did experience unusually heavy rainfall during that monsoon season, it was the human element that turned this natural event into a full-blown catastrophe.
So how did human actions contribute to making those floods so bad?
Deforestation and unplanned construction in the fragile Himalayan ecosystem were major factors. Trees are really important because they absorb rainwater and prevent soil erosion. When you cut those trees down, the water runs off much faster, increasing the risk of flash floods and landslides.
Oh, removing that natural barrier made the region much more vulnerable to flooding.
Exactly. And to make matters worse, the construction of hotels, roads, and other infrastructure in those ecologically sensitive areas further disrupted the natural flow of water, essentially creating bottlenecks that intensified the flooding.
It's a clear example of how sustainable development practices aren't just about protecting the environment, they're also about mitigating the impact of natural disasters.
Absolutely. The Uttarakhand floods showed us that we need stricter regulations on construction in fragile ecosystems, we need to plant more trees to restore the vegetation cover, and we need a more holistic approach to development, one that respects the delicate balance of nature.
Now let's shift our attention to a man-made disaster that really brought the issue of industrial safety to the forefront. The 1984 Bhopal gas tragedy. This event was a turning point in how India approaches industrial disaster management.
It was a tragedy on a massive scale. The leak of methyl isocyanate gas from a pesticide plant owned by Union Carbide Corporation resulted in thousands of deaths, and many more people suffered long-term health problems.
It's a stark reminder of the potential for human error, for negligence, and the devastating consequences that can follow.
The Bhopal gas tragedy showed us that we need strict safety regulations for hazardous industries, well-defined emergency response protocols, and a system of accountability to make sure something like this never happens again.
And it led to the creation of several important laws, right?
It did. The Bhopal Gas Leak Act, the Environment Protection Act, and the Public Liability Insurance Act were all enacted in response to the tragedy. The goal was to strengthen environmental protections, hold industries accountable for accidents, and provide compensation to victims.
But the impact of Bhopal went beyond legal reforms, didn't it? It also motivated communities to demand safer practices from industries and highlighted how important community preparedness is in dealing with industrial accidents.
Absolutely. It's about creating a culture of safety, where industries and communities work together to prevent disasters.
Now let's talk about a disaster that, while not as well known as the Bhopal tragedy, highlighted the hidden dangers of radiation. The 2010 Mayapuri radiological accident.
That incident showed us that radiation, even without a big explosion, can be a very serious, invisible threat.
It involved people being accidentally exposed to radioactive material from a discarded medical device at a scrapyard in Delhi, right?
That's right. It highlighted the need for the proper disposal of hazardous waste and the risks associated with informal recycling, where materials are often handled without proper safety measures.
Our sources mentioned that the event was classified as a level 4 on the International Nuclear Events Scale, which means there was a significant release of radiation.
It resulted in one death and long-term health problems for several other people. It also raised concerns about the potential for radiological terrorism, where radioactive material could be used intentionally to cause harm.
Oh, it's a disturbing thought.
Yeah.
What were the main lessons learned from this incident?
The Mayapuri accident led to stricter regulations for importing, handling, and disposing of radioactive materials. It also highlighted the need for better monitoring of places like scrapyards where hazardous materials might be handled.
It's a reminder that even seemingly small incidents can have far-reaching consequences, and being vigilant and prepared is essential for managing all kinds of hazards, whether we can see them or not.
Now, let's turn our attention back to floods, a recurring challenge for India. We've already talked about the general causes and impacts, but I want to focus on a specific event: the devastating floods that hit Kerala in 2018.
The Kerala floods were particularly severe, causing over 400 deaths and extensive damage to infrastructure and agriculture. What were the main factors that contributed to the severity of those floods?
Kerala received an unprecedented amount of rain during the monsoon season that year. It was more than the state's rivers and dams could handle. But the disaster wasn't just a natural event. Human actions played a big role in making the floods worse.
What kinds of human actions are we talking about?
Things like deforestation, building on wetlands, and releasing water from dams without enough warning, all of those things contributed to the scale of the flooding.
So it's a combination of heavy rain, poor management of water resources, and changes to the natural landscape that resulted in such a devastating outcome.
Exactly. And the Kerala floods were a stark reminder of the impact of climate change, which is making rainfall patterns more intense in many parts of the world, including India.
So it's not just about managing the immediate crisis. It's about adapting to a changing climate and taking those changes into account when planning infrastructure and managing water resources.
Absolutely. The Kerala floods highlighted the need for better flood forecasting and early warning systems, community-based disaster preparedness, and a more holistic approach to water management that considers the interconnectedness of rivers, dams, and wetlands.
It's a reminder that as climate change intensifies, we have to adapt our approach to disaster management to build more resilient communities. Speaking of urban areas, let's move to another major city that experienced devastating floods: Chennai in 2015.
The Chennai floods were another stark reminder of how vulnerable cities are to extreme rainfall, and they showed the consequences of unplanned urbanization.
Chennai received record-breaking rainfall that year, resulting in widespread flooding and essentially shutting down the city.
The city's drainage systems were completely overwhelmed. But the problem wasn't just the amount of rain, it was also about how the city had developed. Building on wetlands, dumping trash in waterways, and failing to invest in proper stormwater management, all of those things contributed to the problem.
So it was a mix of natural and human factors, much like the floods in Kerala.
Exactly. And the impact of those floods was severe. Hundreds of people died, transportation networks were paralyzed, communication systems went down, and essential services like electricity and clean water were cut off.
It's frightening how quickly a modern city can be brought to a standstill by a natural disaster, especially when human actions make it worse. What were the main lessons learned from the Chennai floods?
The Chennai floods showed us the need for integrated urban planning that considers the effects of climate change. It's not just about building more roads and buildings, it's about creating cities that can function sustainably, that can absorb excess rainwater, and that can withstand extreme weather.
So a more holistic and sustainable approach to urban development.
Exactly. It's about investing in robust drainage systems, restoring natural water bodies like wetlands, and having stricter rules about construction in flood-prone areas.
Okay, our final case study brings us back to mining, specifically the 2018 Meghalaya mine disaster. This tragedy really brought to light the dangers of illegal mining practices.
It was a horrific event. An illegal rat hole coal mine in Meghalaya flooded, trapping 15 miners underground.
Rat hole mining, as our sources explained, is incredibly dangerous. These are narrow, makeshift tunnels dug into hillsides, often with no safety measures at all.
Right. And in the case of the Meghalaya mine disaster, the flooding was probably caused by the miners accidentally hitting a nearby water source.
Despite all the rescue efforts, none of the miners survived.
It was a tragedy that showed the urgent need for stricter enforcement of mining regulations, better safety training for miners, and the creation of other job opportunities so people wouldn't have to rely on these dangerous and unregulated mining practices.
It's a reminder that disaster management isn't just about reacting to events. It's about addressing the social and economic factors that make people vulnerable in the first place.
Absolutely. It's about making sure that development, whether it's industrial growth or resource extraction, is done in a way that's sustainable and ethical, with the well-being of people and the environment at the forefront.
We've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive, examining specific disaster events and drawing out valuable lessons from each. Clearly, India faces a wide range of challenges, from natural disasters like floods and tsunamis to man-made disasters like industrial accidents and mining tragedies.
We have. But these events, as tragic as they are, also offer us opportunities to learn and grow. We've seen how India has been adapting its disaster management strategies, incorporating new technologies, strengthening its institutions, and emphasizing the importance of community involvement.
It's a reminder that while we can't prevent disasters altogether, we can certainly reduce their impact through preparedness, resilience, and a collective effort to build a safer and more sustainable future. Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into this really intricate and constantly evolving landscape of disasters in India. We've explored a whole range of them, both natural and man-made, looked at specific cases and really tried to understand the lessons learned from each one. Now I think it's time to zoom out a little bit, put all the pieces together and see what are the big takeaways, the key themes, the strategies that really form the bedrock of a strong approach to disaster management in India.
Yeah, I think one of the most striking things that's come up during our discussions is how interconnected everything is. You rarely see a disaster that's just, one cause leading to one effect. It's almost always this complex mix of factors, environmental, social, economic, sometimes even political, all playing a part in how vulnerable or resilient a community is.
Right. We've seen how things like deforestation can worsen flooding, how unplanned urbanization can increase the risks from earthquakes, and how climate change, which, let's be honest, is driven by us, is making so many natural disasters worse. It's like a domino effect where one thing knocks down another. And so,
Exactly. And understanding that interconnectedness is crucial if we want to move beyond just reacting to disasters, just waiting for them to happen and then scrambling to respond. We need to be more proactive, take a broader approach, address the root causes of vulnerability, and build resilience across all levels of society.
and that brings us to another really important point. Disaster management isn't just a job for the government. It requires everyone to be involved, communities, NGOs, businesses, individuals. We need everyone to work together to share what they know, coordinate their efforts, and build partnerships that can withstand the shock of a disaster.
Right. And think about the role of technology, for example. We've seen how early warning systems that use satellites and sensors can give communities precious time to prepare for things like cyclones or floods. And we've talked about how mobile apps can be used to spread information coordinate relief efforts, and even empower citizens to report damage and ask for help.
And it's not always about fancy tech either. Sometimes even simple things like using social media to share information during a disaster can be incredibly effective.
Exactly. Technology can be a really powerful tool, but it's only as good as the people who are using it. We need people who are trained to use and maintain these systems, effective communication channels to make sure information gets where it needs to go, and programs to teach people how to use these tools.
One of the themes that really resonated with me throughout this deep dive is the importance of communities. People often say that local communities are the first responders in a disaster, and everything we've discussed just confirms that. They know the area, they know the vulnerabilities, and they know what resources are available.
That's right. Their knowledge, their resilience, their ability to come together and support each other, those are invaluable assets in any disaster response. We've seen examples of community-based early warning systems, volunteer rescue teams, and local knowledge guiding relief efforts and making sure that help reaches the people who need it most.
It's a powerful reminder that disaster management isn't just something that happens from the top down. It needs to be rooted in the experiences and capabilities of communities, and it needs to empower them to take ownership of their own safety and preparedness.
Exactly. And that empowerment can take many forms, like training people in first aid and disaster response, helping communities develop their own disaster management plans, and even recognizing and valuing the traditional knowledge and coping mechanisms that communities have relied on for generations.
Another really important theme, especially in a country as diverse and as vast as India, is the link between poverty and how vulnerable people are to disasters. We've seen how marginalized communities, the ones who often live in the areas most at risk, often don't have access to basic infrastructure and services, and they're less able to cope with the impacts of disasters.
It's a stark reminder that disaster management isn't just about technical fixes or building physical structures. It's about addressing the social and economic inequalities that make people vulnerable in the first place.
It's about ensuring that everyone has equitable access to resources, to education, to healthcare, to opportunities. It's about empowering communities to have a voice in the decisions that affect their lives and livelihoods. It's about building a society where everyone has what they need to face challenges and bounce back from setbacks.
Absolutely. And this brings us to something that often doesn't get enough attention in disaster management: the psychological impact of these events. Trauma, grief, losing your livelihood, being displaced, these are all invisible wounds that can take a very long time to heal.
And it's crucial to provide psychosocial support, mental health services, and community-based healing initiatives. That's just as important as rebuilding physical structures. We need to recognize that disaster recovery isn't just about bricks and mortar. It's about helping people heal emotionally, giving them hope, and supporting them as they navigate the long and difficult process of rebuilding their lives.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to stress one last very important point. We have to learn from past disasters. Every event, no matter how tragic, teaches us something that can help us prepare for and respond to future events.
Right, it's about looking back and saying, okay, what worked, what didn't work, and how can we do things better next time? It's about creating a culture where we're always learning, where we admit our mistakes, share our best practices, and adjust our strategies to meet new challenges.
And it's not just about learning from our own experiences. Sharing knowledge and best practices with other countries and organizations can help create a global culture of disaster resilience. We can all learn from each other, support each other, and work together to make the world a safer and more sustainable place.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, exploring the complexities of disasters in India and unpacking the key ingredients of a holistic and effective approach to managing them. From understanding how interconnected these events are to empowering communities, harnessing technology, and addressing social vulnerabilities, it's clear that building a more disaster-resilient India requires a multifaceted and collaborative effort.
It absolutely does. And while the challenges are definitely significant, so is India's capacity for innovation, adaptation, and resilience. We've seen amazing progress in recent years, and with continued dedication, collaboration, and a focus on learning and improving, I believe we can create a future where communities are empowered to face disasters, not with fear, but with the knowledge, the skills, and the resources they need to overcome those challenges and come out stronger on the other side.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it informative, thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit inspiring. As always, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of our upcoming deep dives. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.